Hello, hello. Today, this talk is going to be on concepts and conceptual frameworks, exploring specifically how some conceptual frameworks that we hold consciously or unconsciously hinder our ability to really experience certain depths of beauty, meaningfulness, wonder, freedom, and how other conceptual frameworks that we can choose to feed, nourish, can serve as a catalyst for deeper experiences of depth, beauty, meaning, recognizing the value in those experiences of depth, beauty, meaning. If you think about your life, the most impactful experiences you've had, I would guess that there was some experience of meaningfulness. Maybe not specific meanings, maybe those were there, but that sense, that feeling, that resonance of meaningfulness, I bet that was present in those really important moments in life, whether that's being in a beautiful place in nature, lost in trance and dance and ceremony with a lover. I bet there was meaningfulness in those very deep moments. And recognizing that those experiences of meaningfulness and the beauty that's attached to that, the meaning, the purpose, I bet I know that those are actually co-constructed, meaning the conceptual framework that we hold about what we are, what the world is, what is going on right now. Those concepts, they fertilize the experience that we have. When I say fertilize, I mean if we hold a certain conceptual framework that we see this world as theophany, an expression of the divine, we see ourselves also as theophany, an expression of the divine. Everything we say, every way we move, we can see that as, again, directly from the source of all things. That's a certain conceptual framework. Not that that's the only conceptual framework, but that is a certain conceptual framework where when we hold those concepts, when we hold them in the being, the world that we experience through the senses starts to shift. And one example is we can start to feel communication through the natural world, through the wind, through the sun on your skin, through seeing beautiful places, being up in the mountains. When we hold the conceptual framework as the world, as theophany, self as theophany, you could say this is, in a sense, spirit talking to spirit. World and the subject and object become one. And it can be very deep and meaningful. So that conceptual framework, as far as the theophanic, sacred, divine view, that conceptual framework can lead to induce certain experiences of depth and meaningfulness. And we start to recognize that we have a role to play in the construction of those experiences that are, again, very important for the human being, very important for the psyche, for the spirit. And if we are stuck in maybe a one-dimensional conceptual framework, believing in only materiality, materialism, then we can limit ourselves. We can limit what worlds we can experience. There's nothing wrong with the materialistic view, but if that's the only view that we have access to, it's going to limit the depth of our experience. So the real freedom comes not from saying, the theophanic view, for instance, the more sacred conceptual framework, that's not necessarily better. But it does add dimensionality to experience. So again, the freedom doesn't come from this view or that view. The freedom comes from having the flexibility and the mobility to move between perspectives. To say, hey, sometimes it's just materialistic earth and then these solid labels. Yes, sometimes. That is one lens, one angle we can view self and world through. But that's not the only one. And it would be a mistake. It would be really unfortunate to trap ourselves in just one plane of experience. So being able to consciously construct conceptual frameworks um, to invoke different experiences that we desire, being able to do that, not limiting ourselves to just one. This is where a thorough, radical understanding of emptiness is really helpful. The emptiness of any view, any perspective we could ever hold is not inherently true or real. As much as the dominant culture conditions us to say there is one way, consciously or unconsciously, a lot of us operate assuming that there's one way that the world is, there's one way that we are. And this is not just in the mind. This worldview, this view of self becomes a felt sense. You feel it in your bones. This is who I am. This is how the world is. I know it. And again, you might not even say that to yourself. It's a sense. So this talk is about questioning that sense, the validity of it. How do we know? Are we so sure that this world we experience is the real one? That this sense of self we experience is the real one? And also asking the question, what does that mean? The real one. How do you know? And this is where, again, emptiness kind of already mapped this out and said, there is, again, no way that you are, no way that the world is. It's empty of inherent existence. And in that emptiness, we have the opportunity to consciously and intentionally construct the narratives, the beliefs, the stories that induce experiences we want to have. It reminds me of a Mary Oliver quote. I forget the name of the poem, but Mary Oliver said, "I'll tell you one thing. I've seen some crazy things in my life, and if there aren't angels floating in your head, then you'll never see any." And relating that to conceptual frameworks, if we have a conceptual framework, for instance, where angels are not just mythological, but we can sense them, we can feel them, we can hear them. If we have angels floating in our heads, maybe then we'll see them. And I love that quote, that poem. And I think it says a lot about the depth and the impact of our conceptual frameworks and their ability to create divinity, to create depth, beauty, meaning, and their ability also to limit divinity, depth, beauty, and meaning. In a sense, this might sound sacrilegious to some, but you could say the gods are a co-creation. We, in a sense, create them through belief, through worship, and then we feel their presence more and more. The more that we really give ourselves to them, the more energy we put into the cultivation of those spirits, of those unseen archetypes, images, gods, God. You gotta feed them for them to be real in our lives as a lived, felt experience. And this is where it makes me think of sacrifice. In the Christian tradition, bearing your cross for the sake of the divine, for the sake of other people. Or in like Aztec cultures, human sacrifice, quite literally. What if they were doing that? Maybe unconsciously, who knows? I wasn't there. But human sacrifice as a means to give to spirit, give to the imaginal realm where those things gain power. Again, we have to worship. We have to praise something. We have to worship something for that thing to become solid and real. And if we don't worship it, it fades in our subjective experience. So our conceptual framework plays an integral role in the construction, or lack thereof, of gods, spirits. And we can choose to live in a godless world, which seems to be the dominant paradigm in the modern West, or we can actively choose the intentional construction of spirituality, of gods, divinity, archetypes, angels, all of it, with a knowing of the emptiness of all of it. That's where it's really profound, actually. We can build gods, we can build angels, spirits. We can. Especially in community, that power grows. You get 20, hundreds, thousands of people praying to what? That felt sense of something real grows. And when we recognize the emptiness of it, we're not trapped. This is where it's like a meta level of freedom. I see that I'm constructing all of this. Again, gods are the lack thereof. So bring this back to conceptual frameworks. What conceptual frameworks do we need to feed? Do we need to nourish in order to build a richer experience of spirituality, of connection to something beyond, connection to source, universe, creation, whatever? And we can look to the past as far as traditions like Greek mythology or Hindu mythology, just pantheons of gods, where we worship certain gods at certain times, certain seasons, based on the position of the moon and the stars, have certain festivals worshiping certain gods, feeding these images, these archetypes. And when we feed them through honoring them, they grow more powerful, really. They have more impact on us. So I think there's a lot of potential in this to, again, co-create heaven on earth when we know the emptiness of all of it, emptiness of the godless world and the emptiness of the world inhabited with a rich pantheon of gods, or the one God. It's up to you. We can construct heaven on earth from the inside out. And when we recognize emptiness, we become the ultimate creators of everything that we're experiencing. And how would this affect a culture building over generations, where we thoroughly, again, grasp and understand the emptiness of all of it, and can consciously, intentionally build spirituality from the ground up, seeing it all as fluid? There's a lot there. But our conceptual frameworks do not just, hinder or catalyze sense of divinity. It can hinder and catalyze, depending on the conceptual framework, senses of beauty, which again are really important for the human being. Because beauty is not, you don't have to be in Yosemite, you don't have to be at, Notre Dame, or obviously beautiful place. Beauty can be sensed in any moment. Because again, the experience of beauty is a co-creation. Often we say, oh, it's just normal life. It's just my apartment. We're creating a certain understanding. We're incorporating certain concepts that then invoke a certain experience, which is maybe not that beautiful. But again, what happens if we apply the theophanic view? This is a sacred place. The ground that we walk on is, hallowed ground. I ended up here. This is where I'm living right now. Can I honor this place? Say thank you. And see how that affects the psyche and how that affects beauty, the sense of enoughness. So I wanna point to kind of an image that Rob Berbea gave, explaining these two stages, these two theaters of experience. You could say one is the physical realm, the physical theater of experience. And this physical theater dances with the theater of the imaginal, the theater of the archetypes, the theater of the gods, where these gods, these archetypes, these images, we inhabit them, we live through them. These archetypes, like you could say, Christ exists as an archetype, an image. Buddha exists as an image. The hero, the saint, the wanderer, the magician, the king, the queen. These are archetypes. These are images. Even the loser, the failure, the psychotic person, the crazy guy. These are images. These are images. And we inhabit these images, these archetypes. So this is the value of storytelling and of rich, deep traditions, just mystical, cultural traditions, that they pass down these stories, these images for us to live by and through. So it's these two stages, these two theaters where we dance with the imaginal and they dance with us, because we are also constructing those images. We're constructing those gods. We are feeding them, and we feed certain gods personally and collectively. Is it the god of greed, jealousy, lack? Is it the god of comedy, love, dance, whatever? We choose what we feed and who we dance with in the realm of image. So it's this interesting, again, metaphor image of the two stages where the physical world, everything that we are, dances with the realm of the imaginal. Simultaneously, that realm is dancing with us, where we are constructing, creating the gods, the images, the archetypes that then we live into. So it's this interesting play between the seen and the unseen, you could say. So again, just this brief, it's 17 minutes, this talk on conceptuality, conceptual frameworks. I hope just kind of illuminated a little bit of the potency of them. And I hope it makes you question, what are my conceptual frameworks? And more than just questioning them, am I living one-dimensionally? Do I only have access to one conceptual framework? Because if we only have access to one, we're going to limit what we can experience here. And we don't have to. We can experience infinite different worlds at different times. And none are better than any other. It's just it can be really useful. It is really useful to have access to different layers of experience, different ways to interpret self, world, narrative. And again, not that you have to pick, again, for instance, a theophanic view or a more divine conceptual framework, but it will serve you to have access to that and to be able to have the flexibility to oscillate between conceptual frameworks at given times. If I'm at work, maybe it's not going to serve me all the time to be in the theophanic view. Maybe I just sometimes need to snap into the 3D material world and live as Ben and interact as Ben with other selves, with other separate selves. And that's totally fine. It is totally fine. But then for me, there needs to be other times when I can shed that mask of Ben. I mean, not mask in a fake kind of way, but shed that layer of identity. Go to something beyond it and let that nourish and feed the soul and feed the experience, feed what Rob talks about as the eros, psyche, logos dynamic. So I didn't think I was going to want to get into this right now, but just briefly, I'll make another video on the eros, psyche, logos dynamic specifically, but logos, that is conceptuality. We've been talking about logos this whole talk. And so eros, psyche, logos, you can see it as kind of a trinity. And so logos, you have conceptuality, and depending on your conceptuality, your conceptual framework, you are nourishing certain experiences. So eros is the Greek god of desire, the desire to connect for more intimacy. And that does not just mean sexually, although there's obviously the sexual erotic. There's also eros to become somebody, for spirit to become. There's eros to be of service for some. There's eros to give to the world. There's eros to connect with God, with the divinity. There's a desire to connect. So that's eros. And again, our logos, our conceptuality, the narratives we feed affects what we desire. So if I have this one plane of existence that I'm living on, that limited conceptual framework, let's just say materialism. I live in a materialistic world, and that's what's really real. That's what leads to this kind of flat pursuit of eros, where our desires are focused on more things, more material security, more material comfort, more material gains and experiences. And that's a result of actually only having access to one conceptual framework that you could say is flat. It's flat. It doesn't have the depth that soul wants to dive into. And we'll talk about soul in a sec, but we can learn to focus our eros in other directions that are not just infinite amassing of experience and things, which seems to grip our culture right now. Not everyone wants a lot of nice things, but a lot of people want to amass a lot of diverse experiences. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But it can be limiting and kind of, the word that comes to me is a wasteland, actually. It's like, you're like, nothing's here after a while. It's the same shit. More experiences, same shit, new people, whatever. At least that's how it was for me. It becomes flat if we do not have that dimensionality to it, where we can have it all. We can have the nice things, the experiences, and the depth. And I think what I found is the depth is much more nourishing for the deepest parts of the being. It refreshes, it feeds you to have that depth, meaningfulness, beauty. Whereas if we're just skimming on the surface in that flat existence, and eros only can go in that flat, really plane of pursuit, life becomes kind of meaningless. And that's dark. At least it was for me. So, okay. Eros, psyche, logos, dynamics. So logos, conceptuality, conceptual frameworks. Eros, the desire to connect more deeply, more fully, more intimately, really to penetrate something, whether that's an image, a vision, the divine, whatever. And then we have psyche, which is synonymous with soul, sort of our sense organ of soul, how we sense depth, beauty, God, meaning, that part of the body that resonates with the images, with archetypes, with the gods. And these senses, they can be visual images. They can be a way of looking at something. You could say reverence is maybe a way of sensing with soul. That kind of reverence you feel in a beautiful place, in nature, or again, Notre Dame or whatever. The way you carry your body. Rob Rebea, again, uses a example that is musicians that are really ensouled when they're playing their instrument. They touch that instrument a certain way. And I think he said, like B.B. King named his guitar Lucille, where there's like an intimate relationship going on. Not sexual, but an intimate connection between a musician and their instrument. And we can start to cultivate that deep, intimate relationship with life and ourselves, to connect more deeply, to uncover different elements of self, to uncover different dimensionalities of the world. Or I guess you just say dimensions, different dimensions. And again, I don't mean this in some kind of sci-fi kind of way, but it's like being able to see the world from many different lenses and let them all be valid. That's the thing with emptiness. Emptiness is the skeleton key that unlocks the reality and validity of all of these views and allows us to use any view and recognize it's equally as valid as any other. Because with that view of emptiness, if people are to question the reality of your world, your sense of self, you'd have to ask them, compared to what? Like, this sense of self or this world that I'm living in is less real than what? Show me a world that is not empty, that is not fabricated. Show me a sense of self that is not a constructed fabrication. No matter what, they all are. And from that place of letting those, egoic structures, those worldviews, let them burn. Let them turn to liquid. To question them, see through their ultimate truth, to recognize that these are built experiences, built in mind on the foundation of certain beliefs, assumptions, quote unquote truths, and question them. How do you know? How are you so sure? And emptiness, again, I just want to say, emptiness is not a nihilistic void. It opens up immense beauty and depth and potential to, again, choose a conceptual framework we want to really pursue and grow, and how that affects what we desire most deeply in life, and how that affects what we sense and experience through our soul organ, through the psyche. So I'll do a deeper dive on the eros, psyche, logos dynamic. I hope that made some sense. This trinity of conceptual framework, logos, with the psyche, the soul, and then the eros, our desire to connect with something. And what that thing is depends on the other two factors. So there's a lot here as far as cultivating meaningfulness. But here I want to just start with conceptuality and conceptual frameworks, because that's maybe the easiest thing to access at first, which is, well, eros too. I'll do a video on that. But yeah, understanding our conceptual frameworks, the world we live in, and how it's built based on assumptions and beliefs, and how the self that we inhabit, that we live in, by, and through, is also built off of a certain conceptual framework. And again, it can be anything. It could be material, it could be immaterial. I can be an angel. This can be heaven on earth, it can be a dream. It's all empty. But certain conceptual frameworks, again, lead to different experiences. And having access to all of them, that's where, we don't get stuck in a sort of, self-obsessed, psychotic fantasy. We can still be grounded in the consensus reality, but we have access to deeper dimensions that do really feed the deepest parts of the being. So, yep, logos, concepts. Thank you.